안녕하세요. 잠들입니다. 네, 오늘도 어김없이 찾아와서 인사를 드립니다. 네, 까꿍님 안녕하세요. 1분 전 시작하기 전부터 대기 타고 계셨네요. 감사합니다. 안녕하세요. 그리고 생강님 안녕하세요. 그리고 손 이모티콘 보내주셨어요. 네, 안녕하세요. 오늘도 함께 해주셔서 감사합니다. 까꿍님은 오랜만에 인사드리는 것 같아요. 아닌가? 네, 이게 하다 보니까 종종 이렇게 기억이 가물가물할 때도 있고, 근데 항상 여러분들과 함께 할 수 있어서 감사할 따름입니다. 네, 오늘은 어떤 하루 보내셨을까요? 요즘 날씨가 좀 풀리고 있나요? 한국은? 네, 강국님 맞아요. 한 3일 정도 네, 잘 오셨습니다. 이렇게 막 제가 말하면은 좀 부담스럽지도 않을까 그럴 수도 있는데, 근데 꼭 오셨다고 해도 글 안 남겨주셔도 되고, 네, 부담은 안 가지셔도 되고요. 네, 생강님 다시 추워졌어요. 그렇군요. 그래도 눈이 막 저번처럼 많이 오고 그러진 않죠, 이제? 아니면 아직도 좀 폭설 내리고 하나요? 제 쪽은 이제 아무래도 겨울의 막판 스포트로 눈이 되게 엄청 오는 건 아닌데요. 그래도 되게 잔잔하게 계속 오는 것 같습니다. 그리고 저희 쪽도 내일 모레면은 이제 영하 20도에서 영상으로 올라간대요. 여긴 일교차가 커서 그 하루 최저 기온이 막 영하 15도인데 최고 기온은 막 영상 5도 막 이러고 그러거든요. 네, 생강님 눈은 없어요. 그렇군요. 저는 눈이 없는 걸 선호하는 편입니다. 캐나다 땅에서 살다 보니까요. 네, 아모스님 안녕하세요. 네, 함께 해주셔서 감사합니다. 네, 까꿍님 전혀요. 중간에 오면 제 책이 읽는데 방해되실까봐 제가 조심. 괜찮으세요. 제가 읽을 때는 일부러 챗이 안 보이도록 최소화한다 할까요? 그거 하고 읽기 때문에, 그리고 종종 쉴 때 그럴 때 다시 이렇게 켜서 보고 이제 그때 읽어드리고 합니다. 네, 근데 어찌 됐건요. 편하실 대로 하시면 되죠. 어쨌건 함께 해주셔서 네, 너무나 감사한 마음입니다. 네, 만다링님 안녕하세요. 겨울이 정말 길게 느껴지네요. 유유. 그렇죠. 꼭 이맘때쯤이면은 저 스스로는 이제 겨울이 언제 가고 봄이 언제 오나 이런 생각을 하게 되는 것 같아요. 이제 그게 절정에 다다랐을 때 조금씩 이제 푸르른 밭이 잔디가 보이기 시작하면은 그게 또 반갑더라고요. 네, 겨울이 지나면 봄이 또 오겠죠. 그 봄이 빨리 오길 바랄 뿐입니다. 거진 한 달 정도 있으면은 좀 푸르러지지 않을까요? 네. 아모스님, 캐나다 캘거리는 서울과 14시간 시차 있나요? 이게 몇 시간일까요? 12시간, 16시간인 것 같거든요? 제 시간이 지금 오전 8시 5분이고, 한국에서는 새벽 밤 12시 5분이니까요. 네. 낮, 밤이 바뀌고 4시간이 추가로 다른 거죠. 아침부터 수학을 해버렸네. 네. 까꿍님 기억해 주셔서 감사. 네. 별 말씀을요. 네, 아모스님. 16시간 시차. 그렇군요. 네, 그렇습니다. 어쨌건, 네, 오늘도 함께 해주신 여러분들 다시 한번 감사의 말씀 드리고요. 네, 따뜻하게 어디 계시든지 따뜻하게 주무실 준비하시면서 듣고 계시길 바라며, 데미안 영어로, 오늘은 아무래도 7장과 8장, 그래서 책의 마지막까지 읽어드릴 것 같습니다. 네, 안드레아오님, 안녕하세요. 오늘도 잘 듣다가 잠들겠습니다. 네, 환영합니다, 안드레아오님. 오늘도 꿀잠 주무실 수 있길 바랄게요. 네, 물 좀 마시고요. 바로 이렇게 낭독을 해보겠습니다. 네, 만다링님 들을 준비 완료. 네, 저도 낭독할 준비를 완료해보고 시작해볼게요. Chapter 7, Mother Eve. In the holidays, I went once to the house in which, years before, Max Demian and his mother had lived. An old lady was walking in the garden. I entered into conversation and learned that the house belonged to her. I inquired after the Damians. She remembered them very well. But she did not know where they were living at that moment. As she felt my interest, she took me into the house, searched through a leather album, and showed me a photograph of Damian's mother. I scarcely had any recollections of what she was like, but when I saw the little picture, my heart stood still. It was my dream picture. There it was, the tall, almost masculine woman's figure, resembling her son, with traits of motherliness, traits which denoted severity and deep passion, beautiful and alluring, beautiful and unapproachable. Demon and mother, destiny and mistress, that was she. I was filled with a wild wonder when I learned that my dream picture lived on earth. There was a woman then who looked like that, who bore my fate in her features. Where was she? Where? And she was Damian's mother. I started on my travels soon after, a strange journey. I went restlessly from place to place as impulse directed, always in search of this woman. There were days when I met shapes which reminded me of her and which resembled her. These shapes led me on through the streets of strange towns, into railway stations, into trains, as in a tangled dream. There were other days when I saw how useless my search was. Then I sat inactive, anywhere, in a park or the garden of a hotel, in a waiting room. I looked into myself and tried to make the picture live in me, but it was now shy and elusive. I could not sleep. I only nodded for a quarter of an hour or so on railway journeys through country unknown to me. Once in Zurich, a woman followed me, a pretty, rather forward woman. I scarcely noticed her and went on, as if she were air. I would rather have died at once than have shown sympathy for another woman, even if for an hour. I felt that my destiny was leading me on. I felt that fulfillment was nigh. I was mad with impatience to think that I could do nothing to help myself. Once at a station, I think it was at Innsbruck, I saw at the window of a train which was just moving out a form which reminded me of her, and I was miserable for days. And suddenly, the form appeared again to me at night in a dream. I woke up with a feeling as of shame, realizing the fruitlessness and senselessness of my chase, and I went home by the most direct route. A couple of weeks later, I matriculated in the University of H. Everything disappointed me. The course of lectures I followed on the history of philosophy was just as vain and mechanical as the common ground of student life. Everything was so much according to pattern. One person did as the other, and the boyish faces, although inflamed with a forced gaiety, looked so distressingly vacant. It was like the gloss of a ready-made article. But I was free. I had the whole day to myself, and lived quietly in a beautiful old building outside the town. I had a couple of volumes of Nietzsche on my table. I lived with him, feeling the loneliness of his soul, sensing his destiny, which impelled him onwards unceasingly. I suffered with him, and was happy that there had been one who had gone his way so inflexibly. Late one evening, I wandered through the town. An autumn wind was blowing, and I heard the student societies singing in their taverns. Tobacco smoke rose in clouds through the open windows. Songs were being roared out, loudly and tensely, but the noise did not soar up. It fell dully on the ear, and was lifelessly uniform. I stood at a street corner and listened. From 2 cafes, the flood of song rolled forth into the night. Everywhere community, everywhere this huddling together, everywhere this unloading of the burden of destiny, this flight into the warm proximity of the herd. 2 men passed me by slowly. I caught a phrase of their conversation. "Isn't it just like an assembly of youths in the blacks' village?" said one. "They all do the same things. Even tattooing is in fashion. Look, that's the young Europe." The voice rang suggestively in my ear. I followed behind the 2 in the dark street. One of them was a Japanese, small and elegant. I saw his yellow smiling face shine under the lamp. The other spoke again. "Well, I don't suppose it's any better with you in Japan. People who do not follow the herd are everywhere rare. There are a few here, too." Every word went through me. I felt pleasure and dread. I recognized the speaker. It was Demian. In the windy night, I followed him and the Japanese through the dark streets, listening to their conversation and enjoying the ring of Damian's voice. It had the old tone, the old, beautiful sureness and tranquility, and it had the same power over me. Now, everything was right. I had found him. At the end of a street in the suburbs, the Japanese took leave and closed a house door behind him. Demian took the way back. I had remained standing and awaited him in the middle of the street. With beating heart, I saw him approaching. I saw him approaching erect and walking with an elastic step. He wore a brown raincoat and carried a thin stick hanging from his arm. He advanced without altering his regular stride until he got right up to me. He took off his hat, displaying his old, bright face with the determined mouth and the peculiar brightness on the broad forehead. "Demian," I called. He stretched out his hand to me. "So it's you then, Sinclair? I expected you." "Did you know I was here?" "I did not know for certain, but I hoped it might be true. I saw you first this evening. You have been behind us the whole time." "You recognized me then at once?" "Of course. You're very much changed to be sure, but you have the sign. We used to call it the mark of Cain, if you recollect. It is our sign. You have always had it. For that reason I became your friend, and now it is clearer." "I did not know, or rather I did. I once painted a picture of you, Demian, and was astonished that it was also like me. Was that the sign?" "That was it. It's fine that you are here now. My mother will be glad as well." I started. "Your mother? Is she here?" She doesn't know me a bit. Oh, she knows of you. She will know, without even my asking her who you are. You haven't let me hear from you for a long time. Oh, I often wanted to write, but nothing came of it. For some time past, I have felt I should find you. I was waiting for it daily. He pushed his arm through mine and we went on. Tranquility seemed to emanate from him and pass on to me. We were soon chatting together as formerly. We mentioned our school days, the confirmation class, and that unlucky meeting of ours in the holiday. Only no mention was made of the earliest and closest bond between us, of the affair with Frank Cromer. Unexpectedly, we found ourselves in the middle of a singular and ominous conversation. Having recalled Demian's discourse with the Japanese, we spoke of student life in general, and from that we had branched off to something else, which seemed to be rather out of the way of the former trend of our talk. Nevertheless, from Damian's manner of introducing the subject, there seemed to be no lack of coherence in our conversation. He spoke of the spirit of Europe and of modern tendencies. Everywhere, he said, reigned the desire to come together, to form herds, but nowhere was freedom or love. All this life in common, from the student clubs and choral societies to the state, was unnatural, forced phenomenon. The community owed its origin to a sense of fear, of embarrassment, to a desire for flight. Inwardly, it was rotten and old, and approaching a general breakup. Community, Demian said, is a beautiful thing, but what we see blossoming everywhere is by no means that. It will arise anew from the mutual understanding of individuals, and after a time, the world will be remodeled. What is now called community is merely a formation of herds. Mankind seeks refuge together because men have fear of one another. The masters combine for their own ends, the workmen for theirs, and the intellectuals for theirs. And why are they afraid? One is only afraid when one is not at one with oneself. They are afraid because they have never had the courage to be themselves. A community of men who are afraid of the unknown in themselves, they all feel that the laws of their life no longer hold good, that they are living according to the outworn commandments. Neither their religion nor their morals conform to our needs. For 100 years and more, Europe has simply studied and built factories. They know exactly how many grams of powder it takes to kill a man, but they do not know how to pray to God. They have no idea how to amuse themselves, even for an hour. Look at these students drinking in their tavern, or take any place of amusement where rich people go. Hopeless. My dear Sinclair, no cheerfulness, no serenity can come of all that. These creatures who move about so uneasily in crowds are full of fear and full of wickedness. No one trusts the other. They adhere to ideals which have ceased to exist, and they stone everyone who proposes a new one. I feel that there are troubles ahead of us. They will come, believe me, they will soon come. Of course, the world won't be bettered. Whether the workmen kill the manufacturers, or whether the Russians or Germans shoot at one another, it will only be a change of proprietors. But it will not be in vain. It will free the world of the chains of present-day ideals. There will be a clearing away of Stone Age gods. The world, as it is now, wants to die. It wants to perish, and it will. And what will happen to us then? I asked. To us? Oh, perhaps we shall perish as well. We can also murder people in our position, only we shall not be entirely wiped out. The will of the future will realize itself from what remains of our influence, or with the aid of those of us who survive. The will of humanity will make itself felt, which our Europe has for a long time past tried to drown in its sale yard of scientifically manufactured articles. And then it will be seen that there is nothing in common between the will of humanity and that of our present-day communities, of the states and peoples, of the societies and churches. But what nature wills with men is written in the individual few, in you and in me. It is found in Jesus, in Nietzsche. For these, the only important currents of thought which naturally can alter their course each day, there will be a place when the present-day communities break up together. It was late when we made a halt before a garden by the river. "We live here," said Demian. "Come and see us soon. We shall expect you." I cheerfully wended my long way home through the night, which had become cold. Here and there, brawling students were lurking through the town. I had often felt, sometimes with a feeling of privation, sometimes with scorn, the contrast between our curious sort of gaiety and my lonely life. But now, tranquil and strong in a sense of secret power, I felt, as never before, how little that affected me, how far removed was their world from mine. I reminded myself of officials of my native town, worthy old gentlemen who clung to memories of the semesters they had passed in drinking, as they would to memories of a blissful paradise, and who practiced a cult, calling up reminiscences of the vanished freedom of their university life with all the seriousness which some poet or other romantic would devote to an account of his childhood. Everywhere the same. Everywhere they sought liberty and happiness behind them in the past, for fear of being reminded of their own responsibility, of being warned they were not striking out for themselves, but merely going the way of all the world. 2 or 3 years passed in drinking and jollification, and when they crept under the common shelter and became serious gentlemen in the service of the state. Yes, it was rotten. Our whole system was rotten, and these students' sillinesses were less stupid and not so bad as 100 others. However, when I reached my distant dwelling and went to bed, all these thoughts had flown. Everything else was in suspense as I looked forward to the fulfillment of the promise made to me that day. As soon as I wished, in the morning if I liked, I could see Damian's mother let the students hold their drinking bouts and tattoo their faces, let the world be rotten and on the brink of ruin. What had that to do with me? I was waiting for one single thing, that my fate might meet me in a new picture. I woke up late in the morning from a deep sleep. The day broke for me as a solemn festal day, such as I had not experienced since the Christmas celebrations of my boyhood. I was full of a deep unrest, yet entirely without fear. I felt that an important day had broken for me. I saw and felt the world around me changed. It was full of secret portent, expectant and solemn. Even the gently falling autumn rain was beautiful, full of the quiet, glad, serious music of a festal day. For the first time, the outer world was in tune with my inner world. Then it is a feast day for the soul. Then living is worthwhile. No house, no shop window, no face in the street disturbed me. Everything was as it had to be, but did not wear the empty features of everyday and of the habitual. It was like expectant nature, standing full of awe to meet its fate. Thus, as a little boy, I used to see the world in the morning of a great feast day, at Christmas or at Easter. I had not known that this world could still be so beautiful. I had been accustomed to living shut up in myself, and to content myself with the idea that my understanding for the outside world had been lost, that the loss of glistening colors was inevitably connected with the loss of childish vision. So the hour came when I found again that the garden in the suburbs, at the gate of which I had taken leave of Max Demian the night before. Concealed behind trees in a grey mist of rain stood a little house, bright and homely. Tall flowers stood behind a big glass partition, and leaving shining windows were dark room walls with pictures and bookcases. The front door led immediately into a little hall, and a silent old servant, black with white apron, showed me in and took my raincoat from me. She left me alone in the hall. I looked about me. I looked around, and immediately I was in the middle of my dream. On the dark wood wall above a door, under glass and in a black frame, hung a picture I knew well, my bird with the golden yellow hawk's crest, forcing its way out of the spear. Much moved, I remained standing. My heart felt glad and sorry, as if in that moment everything I had done and had experienced came back to me as answer and fulfillment. Like a lightning flash, a crowd of pictures passed through my soul, my home, the house of my father, with the old stone crest over the arch of the door, the boy Demian drawing the crest, myself as a boy, fearsome under the evil spell of my enemy Cromer, myself as a youth, at the table in the little room at school, painting the bird of my dream, the soul caught in a web of its own weaving, and everything up to this moment, found echo in me again, and was confined, answered, approved. With misty eyes, I stared at my picture and read in the book of my soul. My glance dropped, and the open door under the picture of the bird stood a tall lady in a dark dress. It was she. I could not utter a word. The beautiful woman smiled at me in a friendly way, beneath features like her son's, timeless and without age, full of an animated will. Her look was fulfillment. Her greeting meant homecoming. In silence, I stretched out my hands to her. She seized both mine and with her strong, warm ones. "You are Sinclair. I knew you at once. I am very glad to see you." Her voice was deep and warm. I drank it in like sweet wine. And now I looked up in her tranquil face, into the black eyes of unfathomable depth. I looked at her fresh, ripe mouth, queenly forehead, which bore the sign. "How glad I am," I said to her and kissed her hands. "I believe I have been on my way all my life long, but now I have come home." She smiled in a motherly way. "One never comes home," she said gently, "but where friendly roads converge, the whole world looks for an hour like home." She gave expression to what I myself had felt on my way to her. Her voice and her words were like those of her son, and yet quite different. Everything was more mature, warmer, more assured. But just as Max in years past had made on no one the impression of being a mere boy, so his mother did not look like the mother of a grown-up son. So young and sweet was the breath of her face and hair, so smooth her golden skin, so blossoming her mouth. More queenly still than in my dream she stood before me. Her presence was love's happiness. Her look was fulfillment. This, then, was the new picture in which my fate displayed itself, no longer severe, no longer isolating, but mature and full of promise. I took no resolutions, I made no vows. I had attained an end, I had reached a point of vantage on the way, from which the further road displayed itself, broad and lovely, leading on to lands of promise, shaded by treetops of happiness near at hand, cooled by gardens of delight. Come what might, I was happy to know of this woman's existence in the world, to drink in her voice, to sense her presence. Whether she would be to me mother, mistress, goddess, what mattered to me as long as she was present, as long as my way lay near to hers. She indicated my picture of the hawk. You have never given Max more pleasure than by sending this bird, she said musingly. And I was pleased as well. We expected you, and when the picture arrived, we knew that you were on the way to us. When you were a little boy, Sinclair, my son came one day from school and said, "There's a boy who has a sign on his forehead. He must be my friend." That was you. You have not had an easy time of it, but we had confidence in you. Once in the holidays when you were at home, Max met you again. You were at that time about 16 years old. Max told me. I interrupted. Oh, that he should have told you that. It was the most miserable time I've had. Yes, Max said to me. Now Sinclair has the hardest time before him. He is making an attempt to escape to the community. He has even taken to drinking with the others. But he won't succeed in that. His sign has become dulled, but it shines secretly. Was that not the case? Oh, yes, it was, exactly. Then I found Beatrice, and finally a guide came to me. His name was Pistorius. For the first time it was clear to me why my boyhood was so bound up with Max's, why I could not break away from him. My dear lady, dear mother, at that time I often thought I should have to take my life. Is the way so hard for everyone? She let her fingers stray through my hair as gently as if a light breeze were blowing. It is always hard to be born. You know, it is not without effort that the bird comes out of the egg. Look back and ask yourself, was the way then so hard? Only hard? Was it not beautiful as well? Could you have had one more beautiful, more easy? I shook my head. It was hard, I said, as if in sleep. It was hard, until the dream came. She nodded and looked at me penetratingly. Yes, one must find one's dream, then the way is easy. But there is no dream which endures for always. Each sets a new one free. To none should one wish to cleave. I started. Was that already a warning? Was that already a warding off? But no matter. I was ready to let myself be led by her and not inquire after the end. I do not know, I said, how long my dream is to last. I wish it would be forever. My fate received me under the picture of the bird, like a mother and like a mistress. To it I belong and to no one else. As long as the dream is your fate, so long must you remain true to it, she said, in earnest confirmation of my remark. I was very sad, and I wished ardently to die in this hour of enchantment. I felt the tears, for what an interminably long time had I not wept, rise irresistibly and overmaster me. I turned violently away from her. I stepped to the window and looked out, my eyes blinded with tears, away over the flower pots. I heard her voice behind me. It rang out calmly and yet was so full of tenderness, like a cup filled with the brim with wine. Sinclair, what a child you are. Of course your fate loves you. One day it will belong to you entirely, just as you dreamt it, if you remain true to it. I had composed myself and turned my face to her again. She gave me her hand. I have a few friends, she said, smiling. Very few, very close friends, who call me Mother Eve. You may call me so as well if you like. She led me to the door, opened it, and indicated the garden. "You will find Max out there, I think." I stood under the tall trees, stunned and stupefied. I knew not whether I was more awake or more dreaming than ever. Softly the rain dripped from the branches. I went slowly through the garden, which stretched far along the river bank. At last I found Demian. He stood in an open summer house, naked to the waist. He was doing boxing exercises with a little sack of sand hung from a beam. Astonished, I remained standing there. Demian looked magnificent. His broad chest, the firm manly head, the uplifted arms were strong and sturdy. The movements came from the hips, the shoulders, the joints of the arms, as easily as if they bubbled out of a spring of strength. "Demian," I called. "What are you doing here?" He laughed gaily. "I am exercising. I've promised to box with the little Jap. The fellow is as agile as a cat, and naturally just as sly. But he won't be able to manage me. I owe him just one little beating." He drew on shirt and coat. "You have already seen Mother?" he asked. "Yes, Demian, what a marvelous mother you have. Mother Eve. The name suits her perfectly. She is like the mother of all being." She gazed for an instant musingly in my face. "You know her name already? You ought to be proud, young friend. You are the only one to whom she has said it in the first hour's acquaintance." From this day on, I went in and out of the house like a son and a brother, but also like a lover. When I closed the gate behind me, even when I saw the tall trees of the garden emerge in the distance, I was happy. Outside was reality. Outside were streets and houses, human beings and institutions, libraries and lecture rooms. Here inside were love and the life of the soul. Here was the kingdom of fairy stories and dreams. And yet we lived by no means shut off from the world. In thought and word, we often lived in its midst, only on another plane. We were not separated from the majority of creatures by boundaries, but rather by a different sort of vision. Our task was to be, as it were, an island in the world, perhaps an example. In any case, to proclaim that it was possible to live a different sort of life. I, who had been isolated for so long, learned to what extent community of feeling is possible between people who have experienced complete loneliness. I no longer desired to be back at the tables of the happy, at the feasts of the merry. I no longer felt envious or homesick when I saw others living in community. And slowly I was initiated into the mystery of those who bore the sign. We who bore the sign were probably justly considered by the world as peculiar, yes, mad even, and dangerous. For we were awake, or were waking, and our endeavor was to be more and more completely awake, whereas the others strove to be happy, attaching themselves to the herd, the opinions and ideals of which they made their own, taking up the same duties, making their life and happiness depend on common interest. True, there was a certain greatness, a vigorousness in their endeavor, but whereas, from our point of view, we who bore the sign carried out the will of nature as individuals and as men of the future, as the others persisted in a stubbornness which hindered all progress. For them, mankind, which they loved just as we did, was something already complete, which must be maintained and protected. For us, mankind was a distant future, to which we were all on the way. No one could imagine this, no one could image this future, neither did its laws stand written in any book. Besides Mother Eve, Max, and myself, There belong to our circle in a greater or lesser degree of intimacy many seekers of various sorts. Many of them were going along their own special paths, had set up special aims and adhered to special opinions and duties. Amongst these were astrologers and Kabbalists, also adherents of Count Tolstoy, and all kinds of tender, timid, sensitive people, followers of new sects, men who practiced Indian cults, vegetarians, and others. With all these we had really nothing of a spiritual nature in common, except the esteem which each accorded the secret life dream of the other. Some were in closer contact with us, such as those who trace the searchings of mankind after gods and new ideals in the past, and whose studies often reminded me of my friend Pistorius. They brought books with them, translated for us texts from ancient tongues, and showed us illustrations of ancient symbols and rites. They taught us to see how all the ideals of mankind up to the present have their origin in dreams of the subconscious soul, dreams in which humanity is, as it were, feeling its way forward into the future, guided by premonitions of the future's potentialities. So, we went through the religious history of the ancient world with its 1,000 gods, to the dawn of Christianity. The confessions of the isolated saints were known to us, and the changes of religion from race to race. And from all the knowledge we thus acquired resulted a criticism of our era and of present-day Europe, of this continent which, through enormous exertions, had created powerful new weapons for humanity, only to fall finally into a deep spiritual devastation, the effects of which were at last being felt, for it had gained the whole world only to lose its own soul. There were with us believers as well, advocates of doctrines of salvation, in the efficacy of which they were very hopeful. There were Buddhists who wished to convert Europe, the disciples of Tolstoy and of other confessions. We in our narrow circle listened, but accepted none of these doctrines except as symbols. We who bore the sign had no cares as regarded the formation of the future. To us, every confession, every doctrine of salvation appeared in advance dead and useless. Our whole duty, our destiny was, we felt, to attain to self-realization, in order that in us nature might find scope for its full activities, and that the unknown future might find us ready to fill any role which should be allotted us. Whether we expressed our opinion in so many words or not, it was clear to all of us that a breakup of the present-day world was approaching, to be followed by a new birth. Demian said to me on more than one occasion, "What will come is beyond conception. The soul of Europe is an animal which has been chained up for an immeasurably long period. When it is set free, its first movements will not display much amiability. But the way it will take, whether direct or indirect, is not of importance, provided that the soul's true need is realized, this soul which has been deluded and dulled for so long. Then our day will come. Then we shall be needed, not as guides or new lawgivers. We shall not live to see the new laws, but rather as volunteers, as those who are ready to follow and to stand wherever fate shall call us. Look, all men are ready to perform the incredible when their ideals are threatened. But no one comes forward when a new ideal, a new, perhaps dangerous and uncanny impulse of spiritual growth declares itself. We shall be of those few who are there, ready to go forward. For that purpose have we been singled out, just as Cain was marked with a sign, to inspire fear and hate, to drive the men of his time out of a narrow idyllic existence into the broad pastures of a greater destiny. All men whose influence has affected the march of humanity, all such without differentiation, owe their capabilities and their efficacy to the fact that they were ready to do the bidding of destiny. That applies to Napoleon and Bismarck. The immediate purpose to which they direct their energies does not lie within their choice. If Bismarck had understood the Social Democrats and had thrown in his lot with them, he would have been a prudent fellow, but he would never have been the instrument of fate. The same applies to Napoleon, to Caesar, to Loyola, to all of them. One must always look at such things from the point of view of biology and evolution. When the changes which took place in the earth's surface transferred to the land animals which lived in water, and vice versa, then those specimens which were ready to fulfill their functions as instruments of fate brought new and unheard of things to pass and were able, through new adaptations, to save their kind. Whether these specimens were the same that had previously been conservatives or preservers of the status quo, or the eccentrics and revolutionaries, is not known. They were ready to be used by fate, and for that reason were able to help their race through a new stage of evolution. That we do know. For that reason, we want to be ready. Mother Eve was often present when such conversations took place, but she did not join in. For each of us who chose to express his thoughts, she was, as it were, a listener and an echo, full of confidence, full of understanding. It appeared as if our ideas all emanated from her and returned to her again. My happiness consisted in sitting near her, in hearing her voice from time to time, and in participating in that atmosphere of maturity and of the soul which surrounded her. She felt immediately when a change was taking place in me, when my soul was troubled, or when a renewal was in progress. It seemed to me as if the dreams I had in my sleep were inspired by her. I often related them to her. She found them quite comprehensible and natural. There were no peculiarities which she could not follow clearly. For a time, I had dreams which were like reproductions of the day's conversation. I dreamed that the whole world was in revolt, and that I, alone or with Demian, tensely waited the signal of fate. Fate remained half concealed, but bore somehow or other the traits of Mother Eve. To be chosen or rejected by her, that was fate. Sometimes she said with a smile, "Your dream is not complete, Sinclair. You have forgotten the best part." And it sometimes happened that I recalled it then, and I could not understand how I had come to forget any of it. At times, I was discontented and was tormented by desire. I thought I could not bear to see her near me any longer without taking her in my arms. She noticed that immediately. Once, when I had stayed away for several days and had returned distraught, she took me aside and said, "You should not give yourself up to wishes in which you do not believe. I know what you wish. You must give up these desires, or else surrender yourself to them completely. If one day you are able to ask, convinced that your wishes will be fulfilled, then you will find satisfaction. But you wish and repent again and are afraid. You must overcome all that. I will tell you a fairy tale." And she told me of a youth who was in love with a star. He stood on the seashore, stretched out his hands, and prayed to the star. He dreamed of it, and all his thoughts were of it. But he knew, or thought he knew, that a star could not be embraced by a man. He held it to his fate to love a star without hope of fulfillment, and he created from this thought, a whole life poem about renunciation and mute, faithful suffering, which should better him and purify him. But his dreams all went up to the star. Once again he stood at night by the seashore on a high cliff. He gazed at the star, and his love for it flamed up within him. And in a moment of great longing he made a spring, throwing himself into space to meet the star. But at the moment of leaping, the thought flashed through his mind, "It is impossible." And so he was dashed to pieces on the rocks below. He did not know how to love. Had he had the strength of a soul, at the moment of leaping, to believe in the fulfillment of his wish, he would have flown up and have been united with the star. "Love must not beg," she said, "nor demand either. Love must have the force to be absolutely certain of itself. Then it is attracted no longer, but attracts. Sinclair, I am attracting your love. As soon as you attract my love, I shall come. I do not want to make a present of myself. I want to be one." On a later occasion, she told me another fairy story. There was a lover who loved without hope of success. He withdrew entirely into himself and thought his love would consume him. The world was lost to him. He saw the blue sky and the green wood no longer. He did not hear the murmuring of the stream or the notes of the harp. All that meant nothing to him, and he became poor and miserable. But his love grew, and he would much rather have died and have made an end of it all than to renounce the chance of possessing the beautiful woman whom he loved. Then he suddenly felt that his love had consumed everything else in him. It became powerful and exercised an irresistible attraction. The beautiful woman had to follow. She came, and he stood with outstretched arms to draw her to him. But as she stood before him, she was completely transformed, and with a thrill he felt and saw that he had drawn into his embrace the whole world, which he had lost. She stood before him and surrendered herself to him, sky and wood and brook. All was decked out in lovely new colors, all belonged to him, and spoke his tongue. And instead of merely winning a woman, he had taken the whole world to his heart, and each star in the heaven glowed in him, and twinkling, communicated desire to his soul. He had loved, and thereby had found himself. But most people love only to lose themselves thereby. My whole life seemed to be contained in my love for Mother Eve. But every day she looked different. Many times I felt decidedly that it was not her person for which my whole being was striving, but that she was a symbol of my inward self, and that she wished only to lead me to see more deeply into myself. I often heard words fall from her lips which sounded like answers to the burning questions asked by my subconscious self. Then again, there were moments when in her presence I burnt with desire, and afterwards kissed objects she had touched, and by degrees sensual and unsensual love, reality and symbol merged into one another. Then it happened that I could think of her at home in my room with quiet fervor. I thought I felt her hand in mine, and my lips pressed to hers. Or I was at her house, gazing up into her face, talking with her and listening to her voice. And I did not know whether it was really she or whether it was a dream. I began to foresee how one can have a lasting and immortal love. In reading a book, I had acquired new knowledge, and it was the same feeling as a kiss from Mother Eve. She stroked my hair and smiled at me. I sensed the perfume of her warm, ripe mouth, and I had the same feeling as if I had been making progress within myself. All that was important and faithful for me seemed to be contained in her. She could transform herself into each of my thoughts, and every one of my thoughts was transformed into her. I feared that it would be torture to spend 2 weeks of the Christmas holidays separated from Mother Eve, with my parents at home. But it was no torture. It was lovely to be back home and to think of her. When I returned to H, I remained away from her house another 2 days, in order to enjoy the security and independence of her actual presence. I also had dreams in which my union with her was accomplished by way of allegory. She was a sea, into which I, a river, flowed. She was a star, and I, myself, was a star on my way to her. We felt drawn to one another. We met and remained together always, turning blissfully round one another in close-lying orbits to the music of the spheres. I related this dream to her when I visited her again after the holidays. "It is a beautiful dream," she said softly. "See that it comes true." There came a day in early spring that I shall never forget. I entered the hall. A window stood open, and the heavy scent of hyacinths, wafted by a warm breath of air, permeated the room. As no one was to be seen, I went upstairs to Max Damian's study. I knocked softly on the door and entered without waiting for permission, as I was in the habit of doing with him. The room was dark. The curtains were all drawn. The door to a little room adjoining stood open, where Max had set up a chemical laboratory. From there came the bright, white light of the spring sun, shining through rain clouds. I thought no one was there and pulled back one of the curtains. There I saw Max Damian, sitting on a stool by a curtained window. His attitude was cramped, and he was oddly changed. The thought flashed through me. You have seen him like this once before. His arms were motionless at his side, his hands in his lap, his face inclined slightly forward, with open eyes, was without sight as if dead. In the eyes there glimmered, dully, a little reflex of light, as in a piece of glass. The pale face was self-absorbed and without any expression, save that of great rigidity. He looked like a very ancient mask of an animal at the door of a temple. He appeared not to be breathing. The recollection came to me, thus, exactly thus. Thus had I once seen him, many years ago when I was still quite a boy. Thus had his eyes stared inwards, thus his hands had been lying motionless, close to one another. A fly had been crawling over his face, and he had then, 6 years ago perhaps, looked just as old and as ageless. Not a wrinkle in his face had changed. I was frightened and went softly out of the room and down the stairs. In the hall I met Mother Eve. She was pale and seemed tired. I had not seen her like that before. A shadow came through the window. The bright white sun had suddenly disappeared. I went into Max's room, I whispered hastily. Has anything happened? He's asleep or absorbed. I don't know what. I once saw him like that before. But you didn't wake him? She asked quickly. No, he did not hear me. I came out immediately. Mother Eve, tell me, what is the matter with him? She passed her hand over her forehead. Don't worry, Sinclair, nothing has happened to him. He has retired into himself. It will not last long. She got up and went out into the garden, although it had begun to rain. I felt that I must not follow her, so I walked up and down the hall, inhaling the scent of hyacinths, which dulled my senses, and gazing at my picture of the bird over the door. I felt oppressively the odd shadow which seemed to fill the house that morning. What was it? What was it? What had happened? Mother Eve came back soon. Raindrops hung in her dark hair. She sat down in her easy chair. She was very tired. I went to her, bent down and kissed the raindrops in her hair. Her eyes were bright and soft, but the raindrops tasted like tears. Shall I go and see how he is? I asked in a whisper. She smiled weakly. Don't be a child, Sinclair, she admonished loudly, as if to relieve her own feelings. Go now and come back later. I cannot talk to you now. I went. I walked out of the house and out of the town, towards the mountains. The thin rain was falling obliquely, and clouds were driving at a low altitude under heavy pressure, as if in fear. Down below there was hardly any breeze, but on the heights above a storm seemed to be raging. Several times the sun, pale and bright, broke for an instant through the steely gray of the clouds. There came a fleecy, yellow cloud driving across the sky. It collided with the gray cloud wall, and in a few seconds the wind formed a picture of the yellow and blue of a bird of giant size, which tore itself free from the blue melee and with wide fluttering wings disappeared into the sky. Then the storm became audible and rain mixed with the hail rattled down. A short burst of thunder with an unnatural, terrific sound cracked over the whipped landscape. Immediately after the sun broke through and on the mountains close at hand above brown woods glistened, pale and unreal, the fresh snow. When I returned after several hours, wet from the rain and wind, Demian himself opened the front door to me. He took me with him up to his room. A gas flame burned in his laboratory. Paper lay about. He appeared to have been working. Sit down, he invited. You must be tired. It was a terrible storm. It's evident you were taken by it. Tea is coming at once. Something is the matter today, I began hesitatingly. It can't only be that bit of a storm. He looked at me penetratingly. Have you seen anything? Yes, I saw a picture clearly in the clouds for an instant. What sort of a picture? It was a bird. The hawk? Was it that? The bird of your dream? Yes, it was my hawk. It was yellow and of giant size. It flew up into the blue-black heaven. Demian took a deep breath. Someone knocked at the door. The aged servant brought in tea. Take a cup, Sinclair, do. I don't think it was by chance you saw the bird. Chance? Does one see such things by chance? Well, no, it means something. Do you know what? No, I only feel. It means a violent shock, the approach of fate. I think it will affect all of us. He walked violently up and down. The approach of fate, he exclaimed loudly. I dreamed the same thing myself last night, and my mother yesterday had a premonition, portending the same thing. I dreamed I was going up a ladder, placed against a tree trunk or a tower. When I reached the top, I saw the whole country. It was a wide plain with towns and villages burning. I cannot yet relate everything because it isn't all quite clear to me. Do you interpret the dream as affecting you? I asked. Me? Naturally. No one dreams of what does not concern him. But it does not concern me alone, you're right. I distinguish tolerably well between the dreams which indicate agitation in my own soul and the others, the rare ones which bear on the fate of all humanity. I have seldom had such dreams, and never one of which I can say that it was a prophecy, and that it has been fulfilled. The interpretations are too uncertain, but this I know for certainty. I have dreamed of something which does not concern me alone, for the dreams belong to others, former ones I have had. This is a continuation. These are the dreams, Sinclair, in which I had the premonitions which I have already mentioned to you. We know that the world is absolutely rotten, but that is no reason to prophesy its ruin, or to make a prophecy of a like nature. But for several years past I have had dreams, from which I conclude, or feel, or what you will, which then give me the feeling that the breakup of an old world is drawing near. At first, they were simply faint presentiments, but since they have become more and more significant. Even now, I know nothing more than that something big and terrible is approaching, which will concern me, Sinclair, we shall go through the experiences of which we have so often talked. The world is about to renew itself. It smacks of death. Nothing new comes without death. It is more terrible than I had thought. Frightened, I looked at him fixedly. Can't you tell me the rest of your dream? I begged timidly. He shook his head. No. The door opened and Mother Eve entered. There you are, sitting together. Children, I hope you aren't sad. She looked fresh. Her fatigue had quite vanished. Demian smiled at her. She came to us as a mother comes to frightened children. We aren't sad, Mother. We were simply trying to solve the riddle of these new signs. But that is of no importance. What is to come will be here all of a sudden, and then we shall learn what we need to know. But I did not feel happy. When I said goodbye and went down alone through the hall, I felt that the hyacinths were faded and withered, reminding me of corpses. A shadow had fallen over us. 네, 이렇게가 8장의 끝입니다. 물 좀 마시고 챗을 한번 읽어볼게요. 네, 세지님. 오늘 데미안 영어 버전이군요. 다들 잠들 나이십니다. 네, 굿밤입니다. 틴틴님, 잠들 준비 완료. 네, 잘하셨습니다. 배현주님, 착석. 장유진님, 별 이모티콘. SSYYJ님, 안녕하세요. 네, 모두들 안녕하세요. 잘 오셨고요. 지금쯤 누워서 거의 잠에 들고 계시리라 생각을 합니다. 데미안 7장까지 읽었는데요. 제가 알기론 8장이 마지막입니다. 그래서 오늘로써 영어 버전은 이 책을 끝마칠 수 있을 것 같은데요. 역시 책에 가면 갈수록 뭔가 미궁으로 빠지는 듯한 느낌입니다. 이게 심볼리즘이 너무 깊은 심볼리즘이 캐릭터로도 나오고 관계로도 나오고 해서 이걸 어떻게 해석해야 할지 사실 올바른 해석이 있다기보다는 약간 이 심볼과 심볼의 관계가 여러 방면에서 해석할 수 있기 때문에 그 점이 되게 쉽지 않은 것 같습니다. 네, 생강님, 1시간을 쉬지도 않고 읽으시네요. 대단하세요. 목 안 아프세요? 네. 목이 아프다기보다는요, 이렇게 막 하다 보면은 갑자기 목에 걸릴 때가 있어요. 그럴 때, 네, 최대한 가능하다면은 그 센텐스를 읽고 나서 그때 잠깐 멈추고 물 한 모금 마시고 그렇게 하고 있네요. 네. 날마다 좀 다른 것 같아요. 목의 컨디션이 괜찮을 때가 있고 또 어쩔 때는 좀 막 이렇게 걸릴 때가 많을 때가 있는데 오늘은 평상시보다는 조금 더 자주 걸리는 것 같습니다. 네, 장유진님. 라이브 틀기만 하면 최면 걸린 마냥 자서 책 읽으시는 거 처음 들어요. 늘 잘 듣고 있습니다. 아, 네. 좋네요. 잘 주무신다니까. 네, 감사합니다. 오늘은 어떻게 아직 안 주무시네요. 네. 빠른 시간 안에 주무실 수 있도록 저도 한번 분발해 보겠습니다. 7장까지 읽었는데요. 7장 이전까지는 인제 그 바로 전에 데미안이 그 피스토리어스라는 교회 오르간을 연주하는 사람인데 그 사람을 만나서 인제 술 마시고 방탕했던 그 과거로부터 벗어나서 좀 더 이 어 심볼리즘에 대해서 좀 더 배우게 되는 계기가 됩니다. 그리고 그건 본인의 내면에 대해서 더 이렇게 어 관심을 갖게 되고 공부하고 또 본인의 내면뿐만 아니라 과거의 종교라든지 과거의 문화라든지 뭐 이런 거를 같이 배우게 돼요. 그리고 여찌저찌 해서 어 그 피스토리어스라는 친구가 일종의 가이드로 그렇게 역할을 해 주었는데 인제 그 역할도 끝이 나고 어 서로가 약간 소원한 관계가 되면서 또 그때 다니던 학교도 끝나고 기숙사가 아니었나? 대학교 유니버시티로 네 가게 됩니다. 그리고 8 장에서는 그 대학교에서 어 데미안을 다시 만나게 되는 장면이고요. 7 장이죠. 7 장에서 데미안을 다시 만나게 되고요. 데미안을 다시 만나기 전에 이미 학교에서 벗어나서 데미안을 찾으러 그리고 데미안과 데미안의 엄마를 찾으러 이곳저곳 돌아다니다가 포기하고 학교로 돌아왔는데 마침 거기에서 데미안을 만난 겁니다. 데미안의 엄마의 사진을 어 본 장면이 7 장의 시작으로 저희한테 보여지는데요. 데미안이 원래 살던 집으로 찾아가서 인제 다른 집주인이 살고 있었지만은 데미안 가족에 대해서 데미안과 데미안의 엄마에 대해서 얘기를 물어보니까 그분이 데미안과 데미안의 어머니 사진을 갖고 있어서 그걸 보여줬던 거죠. 근데 데미안의 어머니 사진을 보니까 깜짝 놀랐던 게 그때까지 싱클레어가 스스로 꿈꾸고 계속 그리고 뭔가가 싱클레어 내면에서 되게 집착이라고 할까요? 떠나지 않고 계속 싱클레어 본인을 되게 잡고 있었던 그 이미지가 딱 데미안의 어머니였던 겁니다. 하여간 그래서 그걸 계기로 데미안을 찾으려고 노력하다가 포기하고 학교로 돌아와서 그냥 다니는데 마침 데미안을 거기서 만나게 다시 대면하게 되죠. 그래서 그걸 계기로 데미안의 집에 가고 데미안의 어머니와 인사를 하고 인제 그때부터 어 7장 자체에서도 굉장히 꿈을 묘사하는 듯한 어떤 글을 나열해 놓은 것 같습니다. 묘사하는 장면 하나하나가 되게 꿈속을 장 꿈속을 묘사하는 것 같으면서도 어 인제 여러 가지 의미를 내포하고 있겠죠. 뭐 어쨌건 표면적으로는 싱클레어가 데미안의 어머니를 여러 의미로 동경하게 되는데요. 어 이 작품 자체가 칼 융의 무의식 세계에 대한 영향을 받은 것만큼 이 어머니라는 존재도 굉장히 깊은 내면의 의미를 담고 있는 것 같습니다. 특히 영어권에서는 여성, 남성 이 성별을 구분해서 단어를 구분짓는 경우가 있죠. 그래서 보통 뭐 영어에서도 바다 하면은 여성을 의미하고요. 그래서 어 노인과 바다에서도 그런 묘사가 나오죠. 노인이 바다를 여성으로 비유하면서 네, 그렇게 표현하는 방법, 표현하는 그런 것. 그래서 일반적으로 영어로 see 하면은 it라고도 대명할 수 있지만 her라고도 말을 하기도 하는데요. 같은 의미에서 운명 또한 fate도 it로 이렇게 지명할 수 있지만 her로 운명을 그녀로 표현하기도 하죠. 네, 하여간 그래서 데미안과 데미안의 어머니를 만나면서 내면의 어 발전이랄까요? 그리고 그 어머니 이 장에서는 이름을 Mother Eve 그러니까 이브 어머니라고 이름이 주어졌는데요. 그분과 함께 소통을 하면서 데미안의 아니 싱클레어의 내면 그리고 싱클레어가 꿈꾸는 것 하나하나를 같이 해석하고 이제 본인에 대한 궁금증을 조금 더 갈수록 어 해소하는 그런 계기가 되었던 것 같습니다. 하지만 인제 7 장의 끝부분에 가니까 '세상이 변화하고 있다. 세상은 곧 어 죽음을 맞이하고 그걸로 새로운 탄생을 맞이할 거다.' 그런 뭔가가 암시적인 글로 7 장이 끝난 것 같고요. 그런 암시는 싱클레어 본인도 스스로 느끼지만 어 유추해 보건대 어머니 이브도 그리고 데미안도 그러한 꿈을 꾸고 그 꿈을 그렇게 해석한 것 같습니다. 이게 어느 정도 소름 돋는다고 할 수도 있겠는데요. 물론 시대의 죽음과 또 재탄생, 부활은 니체가 진작에 어 예언한 바 있다고 볼 수도 있지만 어쨌건 그 연장선으로 바라본다 하더라도 이 책이 지어졌을 때가 제가 알기로는 찾아봤을 때 1917 년이라고 제가 읽었던 것 같거든요. 음 그래서 1차 대전 네. 1차 대전에 어 끝날 무렵 집필이 되었는데 그 후에 이 작품이 말한 것처럼 세계 2차 대전이 오고 또 오고 감으로써 시대의 죽음과 부활이 어쩌면 이 장에서 예언된 거다라고 볼 수도 있을지 모르겠네요. 네, 애플7님 안녕하세요. 네, 가을님도 안녕하세요. 네, 환영합니다. 어쨌건 마지막 장으로 들어가기 전에 과연 이 작품이 어떻게 끝날지 참 궁금해지는 그런 이야기네요. 뭔가가 되게 작품 자체가 시작은 나름 간단하고 명료하지만 가면 갈수록 되게 꿈속을 독자로서 꿈속을 헤엄치는 것 같아서 가면 갈수록 뭔가가 굉장히 많은 생각을 자아내게 하는 그런 작품인 것 같습니다. 네, 어쨌건 8장을 다시 읽어보기 전에 물을 좀 몇 모금 마시고 네, 그렇게 진행을 해 보겠습니다. 8장은 조금 더 짧아요. 그래서 글쎄요. 한 2-30분 걸릴까 싶네요. Chapter 8. Beginning of the End. It had been decided that I should remain in H for the summer semester. Instead of staying in the house, we were almost always in the garden by the river. The Japanese, who, by the way, had been thoroughly beaten in the boxing match, was away, and the disciple of Tolstoy was also missing. Demian had procured a horse and went for long rides every day. I was often alone with his mother. Sometimes I wondered greatly at the peaceableness of my life. I had been so long accustomed to being alone, to practice renunciation, to fight toilfully my own battles, that these months in H seemed to me like a time passed on a dream island, where I might live tranquilly in beautiful, enchanted surroundings. I felt that this was a foretaste of that new, higher community on which we meditated. And now and then I was seized by a deep feeling of sadness, for I knew that this happiness could not last. I was not destined to breathe in the fullness of peace and comfort. I needed torment to spur me on. I felt that one day I should wake up from these dreams of beautiful love pictures to find myself standing once more alone in the cold world of others, where for me there would be only loneliness and fighting, no peace, no community of spirit. Then I yielded myself to the charms of Mother Eve's presence. My feeling for her was now doubly tender. I was glad that my fate bore still these beautiful, tranquil features. The summer weeks passed quickly and easily. Already the semester was drawing to a close. Leave-taking was near. I dared not think of it, and did not, but clung to the beautiful days like a butterfly to a honeyed flower. That was my period of happiness, the first fulfillment of my life's wishes, and my reception into the League. What was to come next? I would again have to fight my battles, be consumed by longing, have dreams, be alone. At this time, the feeling, the foretaste of separation, came over me so strongly that my love for Mother Eve blazed up suddenly, causing me pain. My God, how soon would the time come to say goodbye, and I should see her no more hear her firm step in the house, should find no more her flowers on my table. And what had I attained? I had dreamed and had lulled myself in comfort, instead of winning her, instead of fighting for her and drawing her to me for always. All that she said about me, about genuine love, crossed my mind. Hundreds of fine, suggestive words, 100 tender invitations, promises perhaps. And what had I made of them? Nothing. I took up a position in the middle of my room, collected my whole conscious self together, and thought of Eve. I wished to concentrate the forces of my soul in order to let her feel my love, in order to draw her to me. She was to come, longing for my embrace. My kisses were to suck insatiably the ripe fruit of her lips. I stood tense, until fingers and feet became stiff with cold. I felt force was going out of me. For a few seconds, something seemed to take shape with me, something bright and cool. I had for a moment the sensation as if I carried a crystal in my heart, and I knew that was myself. A cold chill pierced to my heart. As I woke out of my fearful state of tension, I felt something was approaching. I was exhausted to the point of death, but I was prepared to see Eve step into the room, burning with passion, ravished. The sound of horses' hoofs clattering down the long street rang nearer and nearer, then suddenly ceased. I sprang to the window. Below, Demian was dismounting. "What is the matter, Demian? Nothing can have happened to your mother?" He did not listen to my words. He was very pale, and perspiration ran down both sides of his forehead over his cheeks. His horse was flecked with foam. He tied the reins to the garden fence. Then he took my arm and walked with me down the street. "Have you already heard the news?" I had heard nothing. Demian pressed my arm and turned his face to me with a dark, compassionate, singular look. "Yes, old man, now we're in it. Now we're in for it. You know of the strained relations with Russia." "What? Is it war?" I had never believed it. He spoke in an undertone, although no one was near. "It is not yet declared, but it's a war. Rely on it. I haven't worried you lately, but I have seen 3 new omens since. It will be no foundering of the world. No earthquake, no revolution. It's war. You will see how that strikes everybody. It will be a joy to people. Everyone already rejoices that hostilities are about to commence. So insipid has life become for them. But you will see now, Sinclair, that it's only the beginning. This will perhaps be a great war, a very great war. The new dispensation commences, and for those who adhere to the old, the new will be terrible. What will you do?" I was perplexed. Everything sounded so strange and improbable. "I don't know. And you?" He shrugged his shoulders. "As soon as mobilization orders are out, I join up. I'm a lieutenant." "You? I had no idea of that." "Yes, it was one of my adaptations. You know, I have never wanted to appear out of the ordinary, and have rather done too much in order to be correct. To do the right thing. In 8 days, I think, I shall already be in the field." "For God's sake." "Look here, old fellow, you mustn't take things so sentimentally. At bottom, it certainly won't give me pleasure to order machine gun fire to be turned on living creatures, but that is a secondary matter. Now, each one of us will be seized by the great wheel of fate. You as well. You will certainly be called up." "And your mother, Demian?" Then, for the first time, I recollected what I was doing a quarter of an hour before. How the world had changed. I had summoned together all my force in order to conjure up the sweetest picture, and now fate had suddenly put on a new, horrible mask. My mother? We need have no cares for her safety. She is safe, safer than anyone else in the world today. You love her so very much? You knew it, Demian? He laughed brightly and without any embarrassment. You child, naturally I knew it. No one has yet called my mother Mother Eve without loving her. By the way, how is that? You have called to either her or to myself today, haven't you? Yes, I called it. I called to Mother Eve. She felt it. She suddenly sent me away. I was to come to you. I had just told her the news about Russia. We turned back, scarcely speaking. He untied his horse and mounted. I first realized in my room how exhausted I was by Damian's message, and even more so by my previous spiritual exertions. But Mother Eve had heard me. My thoughts had reached her. She would have come herself if... How wonderful all this was, and how beautiful. Now it was to be war. Now what we had so often spoken of was about to happen. And Demian had known so much in advance. How strange that the world's stream would no longer flow somewhere or other by us, that now it was suddenly flowing through us, that fate and adventure called us, and that now, or soon, the moment would come when the world would need us, when it would be transformed. Demian was right. One should not be sentimental over it. Only it was strange that I was now to experience that lonely thing, fate, with so many, with the whole world. Good then. I was ready. In the evening, when I went through the town, Every corner was alive with bustle and excitement. Everywhere the word war. I went to Mother Eve's house. We had supper in the summer house. I was the only guest. No one spoke a word about the war. But later, shortly before I left, Mother Eve said, "Dear Sinclair, you called me today. You know why I did not come myself. But don't forget, you know the call now, and if ever you need someone who bears the sign, call me again." She rose and went out through the gloaming into the garden. Tall and queenly, invested with mystery, she stepped between the trees. The foliage ceased its whispering at her approach, and over her head glimmered tenderly the many stars. I am coming to an end, coming to the end. Events marched quickly. War was declared. Demian, who looked strange in uniform, with a silver-gray cloak, went away. I brought his mother home. Soon after, I also said goodbye to her. She kissed me on the lips and held me a moment on her breast, and her large eyes burned steadily close to mine. And all men were like brothers. They had in mind their country and their honor. But it was fate. They peeped for a moment into the unveiled face. Young men came out of the barracks, stepped into trains, and on many a face I saw a sign, not ours, a beautiful and dignified sign, signifying love and death. I as well was embraced by people I had never seen before. I understood and responded gladly. It was an atmosphere of intoxication in which they moved, not that of a fated will. But the intoxication was sacred. It was due to the fact that they had all looked into the arousing eyes of destiny. It was already nearly winter when I went to the front. At first, in spite of the sensation of the bombardment, I was disappointed with everything. Formerly, I had often wondered why people so seldom were able to live for an ideal. Now I saw that many, yes, all men, are capable of dying for an ideal, provided that such an ideal is not personal, not chosen of their own free will. For them, it had to be an ideal accepted by and common to a great number. But with time, I saw that I underestimated men. Although service in a common danger renders them uniform, I saw many, living and dying, approach fate magnificently. Not only in an attack, but the whole time, many, very many of them had a fixed, faraway look, rather like that of a person possessed, a look which indicates entire ignorance of the end pursued and a complete surrender of self to the unknown. No matter what they might believe and think they were ready, they were there in case of need. Out of them would the future be formed, and, however strongly the world's attention appeared to be focused on war and heroic deeds, on honor and other old ideals, however distantly unnaturally sang the voices of humanity, all this was merely the surface, just as the question with regard to the foreign and political aims of the war was superficial. Deep down, below the surface of human affairs, something was in the process of forming, something which might be a new order of humanity. For I could see many, many such died at my side, to whom the understanding was brought home that hate and rage, murder and destruction had no connection with the real object of the war. No, the object, just as the aims in view, was purely a matter of chance. Their deepest and most primitive feelings, even their wildest instincts, were not actually directed against the enemy. Their murderous and bloody work was an expression of their own inner being, of their cleft soul, which wished to rave and kill, to destroy and die, in order to be able to be born anew. A giant bird was fighting its way out of the egg, and the egg was the world, and the world had to go to ruin. One night in early spring, I was doing sentry duty in front of a farm we had occupied. The wind was blowing in fitful gusts, shrieking and moaning according to the vagaries of its mood. Over the high Flanders sky rode an army of clouds. Somewhere or other behind was a suspicion of a moon. I had been restless throughout the whole of that day, troubled by cares which I could not precisely define. Now, at my dark post, I thought with fervor of the picture of my life up to that time, of Mother Eve, of Demian. I stood leaning against a poplar, staring into the agitated sky, the mysterious quivering brightness of which soon resolved itself into a series of pictures. I felt by the odd slowness of my pulse, by the insensibility of my skin to wind and rain, by the lively wakefulness of my inner being, that a guide was near me. In the clouds, a large city could be seen, out of which millions of men were streaming, spreading in swarms over the broad countryside. In their very midst, there appeared a mighty figure of a god, as big as a mountain, with glittering stars in its hair, and with the features of Mother Eve. Into it disappeared the processions of men, as into a gigantic cave, and were lost to view. The goddess shrank down to the ground. The sign on her forehead glittered brightly. She seemed to be under the influence of a dream. She closed her eyes, and her large features were twisted in pain. Suddenly she cried out, and out of her forehead sprang stars, which hurried in lovely arcs and half circles over the black sky. One of the stars rushed noisily through the air to meet me, as if seeking me out. With a crash, it burst into 1,000 sparks, lifting me off my feet and hurling me on the ground. The world broke up thunderously about me. They found me close to the poplar, covered with earth and wounded in several places. I lay in a cellar. Guns growled and rumbled overhead. I lay in a cart and was jolted over empty fields. For the most part, I was either asleep or unconscious. But the more deeply I slept, the more strongly I felt that I was being drawn, that I followed at the will of a force over which I was not master. I lay on straw in a stable. It was dark. Someone trod on my hand, but my inner self willed to go further. The mysterious force drew me on. Again, I lay in a cart, and later on a stretcher. Even more strongly I felt in me the command to go forward. I was conscious only of the pressure, the force which seemed to be controlling my journeying thus from place to place. At last I was there. It was night. I was fully conscious, and I felt strongly the secret attraction and power which had brought me to that place. Now I was lying in a room, on a bed made up on the floor. I felt I had arrived at the place to which I had been called. I glanced around. Close to my mattress was another, on which someone was lying. Someone who bent over and looked at me. It was Demian. I could not speak, and he either could not or would not. He only looked at me. A lamp which hung over him on the wall cast a light on his face. He smiled at me. For what seemed an immeasurably long time, he gazed unwaveringly into my eyes. Slowly, he inclined his face towards me until we almost touched. "Sinclair," he said in a whisper. I signaled to him with my eyes that I understood him. He smiled again, almost as if in compassion. "Little one," he said, smiling. His mouth lay now quite close to mine. Softly, he continued to speak. "Can you still remember Frank Cromer?" he asked. I winked at him, and could even manage to smile. "Sinclair, old man, listen. I shall have to go away. Perhaps you will need me. You will need me once again, on account of Cromer or something. When you call me, I shall not come riding on a horse or in a train. You must hearken to the voice inside you. Then you will notice it is I, that I am in you. Do you understand?" And one other thing. Mother Eve said that if ever you were ill, I was to give you a kiss from her, which she gave me. Close your eyes, Sinclair. I obediently closed my eyes. I felt a light kiss on my lips, on which there was a trace of blood, which never seemed to stop flowing. And then I fell asleep. In the morning, I was awakened to have my wounds dressed. When at last I was properly awake, I turned quickly to the mattress by my side. A stranger lay upon it, a man on whom I had never before set my eyes. The bandaging hurt me. All that has happened to me since hurt me. But my soul is like a mysterious locked house. And when I find the key and step right down into myself, to where the pictures painted by my missed destiny seem reflected on the dark mirror of my soul, then I need only to stoop towards the black mirror and see my own picture, which now completely resembles him, my guide and friend. The end. 네, 이렇게가 책의 끝이네요. 네, 8장에 갑자기 전쟁이 나고 그 전쟁으로 인해서 모든 게 바뀌는 그런 장면인 것 같습니다. 결국 데미안이랑 싱클레어도 전쟁에 나가게 되고요. 끝날 때쯤 책의 마지막 부분에 부상당해서 그 둘이 같은 방에 있게 되는데 아무래도 데미안의 죽음을 암시하는 듯합니다. 데미안이 조용히 속삭이면서 말하길 이제 앞으로 네가 날 불렀을 때 크로모의 일 기억나니? 그렇게 이야기를 시작하는데요. 그때까지 크로모에 대한 이야기를 그 둘 중 마치 서로 짜고 친 듯 아무 얘기도 안 하다가 삶의 마지막 부분 때쯤 크로모의 얘기를 꺼내면서 크로모의 일 기억하니? 앞으로도 다른 크로모가 내 삶에 있게 되면 나를 부르면 내가 더 이상 말을 타고 오거나 열차를 타고 올 수 없을 거야. 하지만 내 안에 내가 있다는 걸 기억하고 나를 부르면 너의 안에 있는 내 목소리가 들릴 거야 라고 말을 하면서 부상당한 싱클레어는 그 다음날 부상을 치료를 받고 둘러보는데 더 이상 데미안이 보이지 않죠. 되게 작품에 걸맞는 엔딩인 것 같습니다. 네, 여러모로 시작부터 끝까지 되게 많은 생각을 하게 하는 그런 작품이네요. 네, 그래서 데미안에 대한 사회적 그리고 역사적인 배경을 제가 한번 정리를 해봤어요. 이거는 사실 제가 한 건 아니고요. 요즘에 누구나 들어봤을 AI를 이용해서 데미안의 배경에 대해서 한번 찾아봤습니다. 그래서 이걸 좀 읽어드리려고 하는데요. 헤르만 헤세의 데미안을 이해하기 위한 사회적, 역사적 배경. 헤르만 헤세의 데미안은 20세기 초 유럽의 심리적, 사회적 격변을 담아낸 현대 문학의 대표작으로 평가받습니다. 이 작품은 제1차 세계대전 중에 쓰여졌으며 니체 철학, 융 심리학, 그리고 정체성 혼란에 직면한 세대의 실존적 위기를 반영하고 있습니다. 아래는 데미안을 깊이 이해하기 위해 필요한 사회적, 역사적, 철학적 배경을 정리한 내용입니다. 제1차 세계대전의 그림자, 순수함의 상실. 제1차 세계대전 1914년에서 1918년은 데미안의 중요한 배경으로 작용합니다. 헤세는 1917년 스위스에서 이 소설을 집필했으며 전쟁에 대한 반발로 독일 시민권을 포기했습니다. 전쟁은 유럽의 문화와 정신적 기반을 무너뜨리는 사건으로 묘사되며 이는 주인공 에밀 싱클레어가 순수했던 어린 시절에서 고통스러운 자아 인식으로 나아가는 여정과 맞닿아 있습니다. 전쟁의 기계화된 폭력성과 도덕적 환멸은 싱클레어가 사회적 위선과 전통적 도덕 체계의 붕괴를 마주하는 과정에 비유됩니다. 또한 소설 말미의 싱클레어와 데미안이 병사로서 새로운 유럽의 탄생을 받아들이는 모습은 당시 독일 사회가 겪었던 애국심과 집단주의에 대한 헤세의 양가적인 태도를 반영합니다. 니체 철학, 선과 악을 넘어서. 프레드리히 니체의 철학은 데미안 전반에 걸쳐 강하게 드러납니다. 니체는 선악의 저편에서 전통적인 도덕이 인간 잠재력을 억압한다고 주장했으며 헤세는 이를 데미안을 통해 구현합니다. 데미안은 싱클레어에게 사회적 규범을 초월하고 자기만의 도덕성을 받아들이도록 이끕니다. 이는 니체가 제시한 이상적인 인간상인 초인의 개념과 연결됩니다. 또한 니체가 기독교를 억압적인 도구로 간주하며 비판한 점도 소설에 반영되어 있습니다. 싱클레어가 경건한 가정 환경에서 벗어나려는 모습은 헤세 자신이 엄격한 개신교 선교사 가문에서 자라며 느꼈던 반발심과 유사합니다. 데미안이라는 인물은 기독교 교리를 깨고 깨달음에 이르도록 돕는 역할을 하며 이는 니체가 주장한 모든 가치의 재평가를 상징합니다. 융 심리학과 개성화 과정. 헤세는 카를 융의 무의식 이론에 깊이 영향을 받았으며 이는 데미안에 큰 영향을 미쳤습니다. 1916년 개인적인 위기를 겪은 헤세는 융 심리학 분석을 받았고 이는 무의식 속 대립적인 힘을 통합하는 과정인 개성화를 강조했습니다. 소설 속에서 싱클레어가 데미안, 에바, 베아트리체와 같은 원형적 인물들과 만나는 과정은 자아 통합 과정을 상징합니다. 특히 아브락사스라는 신비로운 신은 빛과 어두움을 모두 아우르는 존재로서 융이 말한 집단 무의식을 나타냅니다. 또한 싱클레어가 꿈과 환상을 통해 자신 안의 어두운 면, 그림자 자아를 마주하는 장면들은 융 심리학적 상징주의를 잘 보여줍니다. 독일 제국과 전쟁 이전 사회. 데미안은 제1차 세계대전 이전 빌헬름 독일 제국의 엄격한 사회 계층 구조를 배경으로 합니다. 빌헬름 2세 황제 치하에서 독일은 국군주의와 산업화로 번영했지만 보수적인 문화 규범이 지배적이었습니다. 싱클레어가 부르주아 가정에서 자라면서 느끼는 억압감과 금지된 세계로 나아가는 갈망은 이러한 시대적 맥락 속에서 이해될 수 있습니다. 소설 속 학교와 대학 같은 교육 환경은 당시 권위적인 교육 시스템을 반영하며 싱클레어가 또래 친구들 사이에서 느끼는 소외감은 헤세 자신이 엄격한 신학교 교육, 마을브론 신학교에서 겪었던 고통과 유사합니다. 이는 전통적인 억압과 개인적 표현 사이의 갈등을 보여주며 이후 바이마르 공화국 시대로 이어지는 세대 갈등을 암시합니다. 신비주의와 동양 철학, 이원성 극복. 헤세는 힌두교와 불교를 포함한 동양 철학에도 깊은 관심을 가졌으며 이는 데미안에서 이원성을 초월하려는 주제의식으로 드러납니다. 힌두 철학에서 말하는 마야, 환상, 개념은 싱클레어가 현실과 사회적 허구를 구별하려는 노력에 영향을 미칩니다. 또한 데미안의 어머니 에바는 자비로운 지혜를 상징하며 싱클레어가 대립된 힘들을 통합하도록 돕습니다. 이러한 동서양 철학의 융합은 20세기 초 유럽에서 서구 물질주의에 대한 대안으로 신비주의와 영성에 관심이 높아진 흐름을 반영합니다. 특히 아브락사스라는 신성은 선악을 통합하는 존재로서 헤세가 추구한 전체론적 영성을 상징합니다. 이러한 주제들은 전후 혼란 속에서 의미를 찾으려 했던 독자들에게 깊은 울림을 주었습니다. 바이마르 공화국 시대, 혼란 속 새로운 시작. 데미안은 바이마르 공화국이 성립되던 시기에 출간되었으며 독일 사회의 혼란스러운 민주주의의 이행기를 배경으로 합니다. 베르사유 조약으로 인한 경제적 파탄과 정치 극단주의 속에서 독일 국민들은 실존적 불안을 겪었고 이는 소설 속 내면 갈등과 사회 붕괴라는 테마와 맞닿아 있습니다. 특히 창작 활동에 대한 강조는 당시 현대주의 예술운동, 표현주의, 다다이즘 등과 연결됩니다. 싱클레어가 베아트리체를 그리는 장면은 창조성을 통해 사회적 제약을 초월하려는 헤세의 신념을 보여줍니다. 이러한 요소들은 데미안이 전후 문학의 기초로 자리 잡게 만든 주요 요인입니다. 결론, 시대를 비추는 거울 같은 작품. 헤르만 헤세의 데미안은 그 시대의 지적, 역사적 흐름을 종합하여 개인성과 사회 붕괴라는 주제를 심도 있게 탐구합니다. 니체 철학, 용 심리학, 동양 신비주의를 결합하여 의미를 잃어가는 유럽 사회 속 새로운 정체성을 모색하려 했습니다. 싱클레어가 겪는 수능과 진정성, 전통과 현대성, 파괴와 재탄생 사이의 긴장은 오늘날에도 여전히 공감을 불러일으킵니다. 데미안은 특정 시대를 넘어 인간 존재 조건에 대한 보편적인 탐구로 자리 잡았으며 현대 문학사의 중요한 작품으로 남아 있습니다. 네, 이렇게가 데미안이라는 작품의 이해에 조금 더 도움이 될 수 있는 배경 지식입니다. 네, 어쨌건 이 작품을 여러 가지 방면에서 바라보고 이해할 수 있겠지만, 그리고 물론 이 작품이 시대의 배경을 바탕으로 작품을 그렸던 것도 사실이지만 인물 하나하나의 묘사에 대한 그 현실감, 그리고 싱클레어의 내면의 갈등, 이런 것이 단순히 시대를 대변한다고 보는 것보다 드라마의 캐릭터를 보듯 캐릭터 자체로 받아들일 수도 있다 생각이 듭니다. 네, 한동안 이렇게 읽으면서 알게 모르게 좀 이런 생각이 제 머리에 또 자리 잡게 된 것 같아요. 이 작품을 통해서 제가 느낀 교훈 뭐 이런 것들. 네. 근데 뭐 고전이 늘상 그렇듯 이런 작품은 또 여러 번 읽고 여러 번 곱씹으면서 제대로 이 작품의 의미와 이 작품의 어떤 그런 단맛을 계속 돌아와서 읽어봐야 될 것 같습니다. 네, 여러분들은 어떻게 들으셨는지 잘 모르겠네요. 그리고 앞으로 한국어로 또 읽어드릴 게 아무래도 이 페이스로 가면은 다음 주까지 읽어드리지 않을까 싶은데요. 네, 어쨌건 어, 여러 생각을 하게 하는 그런 작품인 것 같습니다. 그리고 또 이 모습이 이러한 작품이 얘기하는 주제가 우리 한국 사회와 또 맞물려서 음, 많은 교차점이 또 있는 것 같기도 하네요. 물론 해세가 작품을 만들었을 때 다른 시대적 배경 그리고 다른 어떤 주제에 대해서 얘기를 하는 것도 맞지만 한국 사회에서 또한 사회적으로 굉장히 뭐랄까요? 나의 정체성을 사회가 부여해 주는 경우가 많기 때문에 내가 나 개인으로서 온전히 개인화를 이루려면 나에게 강압받는 이 사회에서 어떻게 살아가야 하나 이런 질문들을 던지는 것 같습니다. 어쩌면 특히 어, 수험생분들, 학생분들이 또 그렇게 뼈저리게 느낄 수도 있을 것 같고요. 사실 학생이 아니어도 우리나라에서 산다면 누구나 그런 어, 갈등을 느끼지 않을까 생각이 드네요. 뭐 학생 시절이 끝나고 취업을 준비하는 분들도 그럴 거고 또 취업에 성공해서 회사를 다니는 분들도 그럴 거고 본인의 자리가 어떠하든 그 자리에서 이렇게 해야 한다라는 그런 음, 암묵적인 사회의 강요가 있기 때문에 그 기준에 미치지 못하면 어쩌나 하는 두려움과 또 이 기준에 만약에 본인 스스로가 미친다고 생각했을 때 본인의 우월감으로 삶을 살게 되는 어떤 그러한 유혹이 언제든지 있는 것 같습니다. 또 그건 뭐 일에 대해서 그런 거지만 그 반대로도 그 반대가 아니라 뭐 그 외로도 가정에서 뭐 가장이라면 가장이 뭐 어떻게 살아야 하고 뭐 어머니라면 뭐 어떻게 해야 되고 뭐 아들이라면 또 딸이라면 뭐 자식이라면 어떻게 해야 하고 이런 규율들이 네, 어찌 보면 한국에서 참 많은 것 같습니다. 그래서 왠지 씁쓸하기도 하면서 이런 작품을 통해서 왠지 모를 카타르시스가 느껴지기도 하는 것 같습니다. 개인적으론. 네, 생각님 잘 들었어요. 알아듣진 못했지만 네, 감사합니다. 아유, 함께 하셔서 이 오랜 시간 동안 네, 얼마나 참 감사한지요. 네, 밍미님, 오와 나의 꿈나라 선생님. 네, 안녕하세요. 꿈나라 선생님인데 2시가 다 됐는데 안 주무시네요. 네, 빨리 주무실 준비해야죠. 마침 데미안에서도 꿈에 대한 얘기가 많이 나오죠. 이 꿈에 대한 해석은 프로이트가 먼저 거기에 대한 문을 활짝 열었던 것 같은데 이제 그 후로 칼 융 아니면 카를 융이라는 프로이트의 유명한 제자분 중 한 분이 또 그거를 더 발달시켰다고 볼 수도 있는 것 같습니다. 물론 이제 꿈의 해석이라는 거는 요즘 시대에서는 좀 약간 사이비와 같은 그런 취급을 받는 것도 사실이겠지만 그럼에도 불구하고 꿈속에서 우리가 느낀 것이 우리의 내면, 잠재된 우리의 내면, 그리고 무의식 속에 깊은 우리 스스로의 모습을 보여주는 그런 창문이 아닐까 네, 생각이 드네요. 밍미님의 꿈나라 선생님이라고 말씀하셔서 이렇게 얘기가 새는데요. 네, 오늘도 하루의 마무리를 함께 해주신 여러분들께 네, 너무나 감사하다는 말씀을 드리고 저는 이만 저의 하루를 시작할까 하고요. 내 하루의 마무리가 이렇게 됐는데요. 어떻게 좋은 하루 보내셨는지요? 어떤 특별한 일이 있으셨는지, 아니면 늘 그렇듯 하루하루 살아가는 게 별반 다를 것 없는 그런 하루 지내셨는지요? 네, 별로 특별하다고 생각이 되지 않는 하루여도 사소한 것 하나하나에서 아름다움을 느낄 수 있는 그런 하루가 되었길 바라고, 또 내일도 그런 하루, 또 특별하고 평범하더라도 사소한 것이 특별한 그런 하루가 되길 바라겠습니다. 듣고 계신 모든 분들 지금쯤이면 이불 속에서 따뜻하게 주무시고 계시리라 믿으면서 저는 이만 감사의 인사로 여러분들과 작별 인사를 하도록 하겠습니다. 내일 똑같은 시간 밤 12시에 혹은 밤 12시 근처에, 종종 좀 늦어서 12시 15분에 하기도 하는데요. 그때 다시 데미안 제 3장 맞죠? 제 4장인가? 어쨌건 한글로 다시 인사를 드리도록 하겠습니다. 그럼 다시 한번 감사드립니다. 오늘 굿밤 되시고요. 좋은 잠 되시길, 그리고 내일도 행복한 하루 되시길 바라겠습니다. 안녕히 주무세요.